Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being with us. I hope everybody's had a good Fourth, a good start to the summer. We have wonderful presenters today, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. As many of you know, since October 7th, so many of our communities, especially our 21 college and university campuses, have been struggling with community conflicts, an increase in hateful behaviors, protests, how to resolve all of those issues. And we've been working very hard with all of our partners in those settings, as well as with communities, because you've also seen many communities, these kinds of conversations have led to conflict, disagreement, very difficult situations where people are trying to figure out how to have a community dialogue in a way that is peaceful and respectful. So that's going to be one of our topics. We remain on that issue really steadfast about prosecuting what does constitute a hate crime and a civil rights violation, staying in close contact with our partners to kind of identify if there are trends there, but also really wanting to encourage the conversation about what is peaceful protest, what is free speech, what kinds of discussions we all need to be mindful are going to happen and should happen in democratic communities. We're also going to hear today about $1 million congressional grant to jumpstart the creation of Malden's first community center for Asian Americans. You know, we talk all the time about the fact that Middlesex County is incredibly diverse in every possible way. And Malden has the third highest concentration of Asian American citizens in Massachusetts. 27.5% of their 65,000 residents are of Asian descent. And we are actually going to begin this morning with hearing from Andrea So and Mai Du, the founders of the Greater Malden Asian American Community Coalition. And let me tell you a little bit about them. Andrea So is really a dedicated educator and community leader who has over 15 years of experience here in Boston. She's been an assistant principal in a Boston public school and focuses on implementing something that we've spent a lot of time working on, the restorative justice practices, fostering inclusive education, and promoting equity among her students. Her career began as a special education math teacher, teaching students in grade 7 to 12, in various kinds of classroom settings. She then became an instructional technology coach, overseeing one-to-one iPad initiatives, developing student technology teams, something we are all still struggling with, despite the fact that students have long mastered so much of this. And beyond her work in the schools, Andrea is deeply involved in community organizing. She co-founded and serves as the president of the Greater Malden Asian American Community Coalition. She's led initiatives there to support Asian American youth, promoted civic engagement, and addressing the needs of that community during COVID-19. And she's also worked with other groups, including the Massachusetts Asian American Educators Association and the B2U Ethnic Studies Now Organizing Committee. And that outreach has continued with Chinese-speaking parents and addressing cultural and generational differences. Her educational background includes a Master's of Education in School Leadership from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, a Master of Arts in Teaching from Northeastern, and a Bachelor of Science in Math and General Music, also from Northeastern. She, as you would expect, has been recognized in the community for these contributions, receiving the Zonta Club of Malden Women Making a Difference Award last year, and also just real recognition of the positive change in community development that she has been able to affect, primarily in Malden, but in the bigger community. Mai Du, who was named one of the Get Connected Boston's 50 most influential Asian American Pacific Islanders in January of 23, has been a community advocate and activist since the 1990s. And as a young leader, she was part of the co-founding of the Coalition for Asian Pacific American Youth, which sought to really engage Asian American, Pacific American youth across Massachusetts giving them both visibility and a voice to working towards positive social change. She did her undergraduate and graduate studies here in Middlesex at Tufts, earned a master's in education, focusing on racial ethnic studies and school and community collaborations. She has continued to commit to that work across Greater Boston. She formerly served as the Director of Volunteer Resources, Youth Programs, and International Social Services for the American Red Cross of Massachusetts. She was a Kumon math and reading instructor and franchisee, and she joined Walum Kung Fu and Tai Chi Academy in 2006, which has a strong presence both in Malden and in Quincy. In March of this year, the company was recognized as one of Boston's most influential community organizations. Excuse me, and the United States Dragon and Lion Dragon Federation board members also recognized her contributions, and she co-founded the Coalition for Anti-Racism and Equity, which is known as CARE. She currently serves as its founding president and is championing really statewide opportunities to advance Massachusetts legislation, which would promote a racially inclusive curriculum in K through 12 Massachusetts schools. She also serves on the GBH Community Advisory Board. So busy and active and involved at so many levels. So I'm delighted to have them here to talk about this grant that they've received and the work they're doing. I want to recognize as well, because it is true what I say all the time, the amazing things we're able to do here are really in large part based on our law enforcement partnership. So I want to recognize Chief Cronin from Malden, who's here as well, and has really been a dedicated member, has become a dedicated member of this group. So Andrea and Mike, I'm turning it over to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, DA Ryan, for such a humble introduction for the two of us. Thank you so much for taking so much space, but we greatly appreciate this opportunity. And I also see many friends here. I want to shout out to the friends here, and I don't want to take many space, but I just want to acknowledge that that there are many friends here in this space, and who are great community collaborators and partners in the work of GMAC, Greater Malden Asian American Community Coalition. I'll start out, and then Andrea will jump in as well to share about GMAC and share about our amazing support of the federal grant that's being highlighted here today. Greater Malden Asian American Community Coalition, GMAC, has been around for about 10 years now. It has been founded by a group of community leaders and residents who saw their need of Asian American residents in Malden, particularly, and when we say Malden, we also encompass Greater Malden, because we recognize that over the years, Malden has become a hub for many Asian Americans in the North Shore. So that will include Everett, Saugus, Medford, Melrose, and surrounding communities that even Chelsea, where they come for grocery shoppings and the delicious Asian American cuisines and services and etc. So we came together and we wanted to have an organization that is for Malden and by Malden residents and leaders. There are many amazing Asian served organizations in the Greater Boston area, and many of our Malden and let me say Greater Malden residents do go there, and for a long time they had to take the bus or the T and or wait for their loved ones to drive them, especially the seniors, into Boston for even healthcare or just shopping, like I said at one point. So recognizing that, and also actually career development opportunities, programs that are offered by many organizations such as the Asian American Civic Association, or advocacy support such as Chinese Progressive Association, Asian American Resource Workshop, Asian Community Development Corporation, and whatnot. So we recognize that we have many great partners, but we didn't have a strong advocacy organization within the Greater Malden in the North Shore, and particularly in Malden. So we came together, and our mission is to build voice representation and visibility and power. And eventually, all that comes to building resources. Um, so being around just a little bit in terms of what we do, and I know Andrea will jump into kind of more details about the program, but just overall, we have youth leadership development, senior services, anti-gambling programming, mental health programming to address the needs there. And we know that's a national crisis in terms of mental health, and particularly youth mental health and youth mental health issues for Asian American youth coming out of the pandemic, and also during this time of heightened anti-Asian hate. So there's been a lot of concerns about that for our young people and our seniors. And of course, like other at one point during the pandemic culturally sensitive food deliveries and more. So I'll share. I'll let Andrea share those things, but just want to jump right into kind of the grant that the DA was talking about. With 28% Asian American, about 28% now being in Malden, majority of that is Chinese American. And in fact, more than 20%, I will say, because with that fact, we were able to work with a lot of community partners, particularly the Greater Boston Legal Services Asian Outreach Center, to advocate for both language access and voting, better voting rights and services for the Chinese American residents in Malden. So we were successful to collaborate very well with the city of Malden, with the mayor's office and the clerk's office to advance better voting experiences. And that meant that we were able to have Chinese interpretation, poll workers with providing that direct service, and then successfully advanced the Chinese transliteration bill to have Chinese candidates, Chinese names for candidates on the ballot, and that's going to be the first for this coming November. So having all these needs and this large population of Asian Americans in Malden, we still found that we have no home, meaning that our organization has no physical space, and that we find our services and programs. So we have the gracious support of the UU Church on 12 Elm Street to have our program for ping pong, and then we have the support of the high school to have our youth programs within the high school space after school with limited hours. And then there are also our dance groups of senior women, not really being able to find physical space to gather for social and mental health and well-being. So we're spread all over the city with great support by many groups, but still struggle with having a physical location. And as the GMAC leaders come together to really talk about, the presence and the needs and also the contributions of our Asian American residents in Greater Malden, we recognized that we needed to really build a home, and in that sense, a permanent home. What do we mean by permanent home? We also see the struggles of so many nonprofit organizations and organizations that are serving communities of color in Malden and beyond, where eventually, due to, as we know, affordable housing and gentrification, even nonprofit organizations have a very hard time to be able to afford rent and afford a place where they can continue to just have a presence. And so in the similar vein of home ownership for individual families, when we talk about community and we talk about the collective individuals and the collective families, GMAC here represent the larger Asian American community in Greater Malden. We had the vision of actually approaching collective home ownership, meaning that we would like to buy a home for our organization and not just to look for rent, because we understand that when we rent a location for an organization, for a nonprofit organization, that means that we're still under um, the power of those who are our landlords. And that could mean that at any moment in time, rent can be more expensive. And also we can be basically kicked out anytime. And we have seen that for many nonprofit organizations that are providing vital services to our community. So we had that conversation with many of our partners and supporters, and we're so grateful for their basically extraordinary support by Congresswoman, who is also our whip in the House in DC, to look into how we can support this dream of GMAC and the Greater Malden Asian American community to have our permanent home. And when we were looking into that, I don't know if folks had a chance to read the Boston Globe article that covered this about a month ago or a month plus ago. When we were looking into how to make this happen, GMAC leaders were struggling with what comes first, the money to be able to purchase a property, or having a location where we can identify as a prospect to buy and then to raise the money. Because now at this age, day and age, you have to be able to have at least a couple of hundred, if $1,000, if not more, to be able to identify a location and say, okay, we're going to pursue that property and then raise the money. But by that time, we won't be able to buy. So unless we have seed money that is at the amount of at least $250,000 these days, we won't be able to even pursue the idea of buying a permanent home for a community. So we got to a point where we even gather community leaders and members and say, can you give us a loan so that we can come up with this amount to down a purchase when we see the appropriate location that will pop up. And not to discredit also the efforts to look into community support and city support of identifying spaces. We work closely with Mayor Christensen's office and Kevin Duffy and Debbie Bark with their Malden now Redevelopment Authority. That if there even be city spaces that could be cheaper or available, and we tried all avenues, and to no avail. So when we approach Whip Clark's office, and oh my gosh, her staff are amazing. I want to recognize Kelsey Perkins and Wade Blackman for just the amazing support to GMAC and the Greater Malden Asian American community as a whole. Uh, we we came together and just explore our avenues to see if we cannot get enough city funding and state funding. And I also want to acknowledge that thank you to Senator Jason Lewis and Representative Steve Otrino for helping us to also get seed funding at one moment in time, $50,000 for us to explore the establishment of an Asian American Community Center. But with the larger support of Whip Clark's and her influence in DC, we were successful in securing $1 million of federal appropriation that we just heard about the last, I would say 2.5 months ago, and it came at the heel of the insanity of DC and how House Republicans have been just blocking everything and we hear the crazy budgeting process, but Whip Clark and her team was able to get our appropriation request through, and that has just been tremendous and amazing, and we know how hard it was for that to happen. And you know what? Just right after our appropriation was approved, the House changed their rules that any new federal appropriation for communities will actually not go to any more nonprofit organizations. So we just made it, and the whip herself said that she cannot even think of another time that that will happen except for this past time that that we were able to kind of actually squeeze it through. So she said it was timely, and she doesn't know it will come back again as an opportunity. So we are so grateful for that window of time that she was able to whip basically the support for it. And so we're just thrilled for this opportunity. Um, and and we want to just acknowledge the amazing support from the community. We had a lot of organizations came through with letters of support, including our city councilors, in addition to our state leaders, whom I mentioned, many nonprofit organizations, including the Boston Foundation Asian Community Fund, the aforementioned organizations, as well as um, I just want to know. Oh, yes, our friends in Lexington, because the Lexington folks are also a part of the fifth district congressional district. So we had the Chinese American um, Association of Lexington also wrote letters of support and really vouch for the needs for the Greater Malden Asian American. So I'm gonna pass it over to Andrea to share a little bit more about, some of the programmings that we do specifically and where we're hoping to move forward, including kind of
Yes.
the identify location.
Yes. So thank you, Mai, for sort of going over like a large history of things. And I'm recognizing that, we should finish up and wrap up here. And I just looked up and, I'm excited to DA Ryan, thank you so much for like the introduction. To add to that introduction, I'm actually transitioning to be the director of elementary education for the town of Lexington, which means my full-time gig will actually be in the Middlesex County. So I'm excited about that. And some of the work that I do as an educator, as well as like a community leader, has to do with sense of belonging. If there's not a lot that we're taking away, right, from talking about like anti-hate and things like that, is that a lot of times Asian Americans don't get to feel a sense of belonging in this space. And we find that, we're grateful that our community partners and everybody who recognizes the need. I learned a horrendous statistics yesterday when I was meeting with a Harvard professor who's doing research. She says that, the NIH grants funding funds only 0.17% of funding goes to Asian Americans research. Asian American young women ages 15 to 24, the leading cause of death for that group is suicide. Think about the disparity of the funding that is allowed. Like, we are literally invisible when it comes to that funding. It's not even like, a penny in the whole entire large pie that I saw. And I was speechless. I was like, well, if we're talking about the invisibility of Asian Americans and how we don't feel like we belong, well, this is the reason why, because we are invisible. We're invisible in the largest grant funding, right? That is given to biomedical research. And so, coming back to this community center, we're extremely grateful, and that folks are recognizing the invisibility and the fact that Asian Americans are perpetual foreigners, and that we are very, very committed to building a home where Asian Americans of all ages and of all diverse background will feel that they have a home where they feel like they belong. They don't have to be asked twice about things that are, culturally very the cultural norms for many Asian Americans, right? They don't have to walk into a space and be like, oh, where are you from? Well, we're all Americans, we're from here. And receiving services. So we are continuing our work in expanding our services in mental health, and we're hoping to, with the establishment of the center and support from other folks, that we are able to really think about like social services that are culturally relevant and culturally responding, and really create a space for Asian Americans to feel that sense of belonging so that we can thrive, right? Currently, a lot of these are about survival. And I think that it would be great for Asian Americans to find a space that they can call home in the Greater Malden area so that we can think about thriving.
We want to check in on time, And also, if I don't know if the format allows for Q&A, but we want to make sure that
Thank you
we
both.
are.
That was a great accomplishment. Questions, comments?
I'll just add, as you go along, and I think what you were talking about, if there's any of us on the call, I guess if we can identify or help in identifying space or locations that are available, but also if you could let us know, and we will share with our partners any information about the community center when it's opening and in any way that we can help, just send that information to me.
Yes.
A
Thank
couple
you.
of comments, District Attorney Ryan, a couple of comments and a question, and then I would ask for an opportunity to participate, to support, to help this initiative. First of all, Mystic Valley and NAACP would love to have you on our agenda soon. We are widening our scope to try to be more supportive and interactive and collaborative with the AAPI community, both locally and across the Mystic Valley. I'm going to put my contact information, Mai and Andrea, in the chat, and also maybe give us the 1, 2, 3 things that people who want to support your initiatives and your organization can do to help you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you for the offer, Tonya, for location and whatnot. We actually have identified a location and we are working through that. Although because it's a commercial space and with the changes of kind of commercial values right now, there has been a little bit of a challenge to have a new agreement in terms of value. And we're also wanting to make sure that we are responsible stewards to federal dollars here, that we are getting the best purchase that we can. So there is something of interest right now that is an amazing location right in the center of Malden, but we're still working out the details, and hopefully that will move forward. In the meantime, we would appreciate any kind of knowledge of available new spaces that may work out well as well, so that we have an options in case we need to fall back onto something new. So anything of, we would really appreciate it. To know we are interested to buy and not rent, for the purpose of what I share, which is for a permanent home that is going to be owned by the community. And then secondly, we are going to be embarking on a capital campaign to raise money in I mean, $1 million, an amazing amount. But we also understand that with how it goes right now, that $1 million to serve as a home to serve the entire community is not enough to, it will not be enough to just buy a location, and then we have to build it out, and then we have to also hire staffing and then expand our services. So we will be launching a capital campaign for for the Greater Malden Asian American Cultural and Community Center. And I just want to highlight that word cultural. There has been a lot of needs for cultural expression and cultural being and support for the community. So across generations, the seniors, the youth, there's just been interest for that kind of engagement. So we started out with just community center, but it was very clear that the cultural aspect of community existence is key to our sense of belonging, and also to be healthy and thriving. So so anything related to kind of cultural and community funding, as well as just connection to folks who will feel very, very compelled to support this initiative in Greater Malden, please send us all those connections and resources, and as well as volunteer to support our programming. We are very much looking forward to expanding our mental health programming. That's really key right now, and also building that youth pipeline for youth leaders. One last thing I want to say is that at this up to this point, we talk a lot about the Asian American community, but GMAC's one of GMAC's main tenants in our mission is also building solidarity. So we understand that, you know, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And we also recognize the diversity and the need for inclusion across communities of color. And, you know, we got to show up for each other. You know, we can't, for everyone, it doesn't matter what background you are. If you don't show up for each other, we continue to work in silos. And that when one community is in need for support and resources, they find themselves just working within their own communities to try to make that happen. And that's not enough. But truthfully, that is not just about looking out for our own selves. It's really that, you know, to be good neighbors, to have a healthy community, you know, you have to be healthy and your neighbors next door have to be healthy as well. And that's how we can have a healthy community. So it's not just about everything that happened within our own fences, but that, you know, we got to extend our arms to each other and to understand and build connection, and really understand and uplift each other's experiences. That's how we can move forward, you know, especially during this time. It is so important that we are going to keep showing up for each other. I cannot express that, you know, enough and underscore, you know, that concept more than ever right now. And we recognize that as Asian Americans, we got to be there for our Black and Brown and Indigenous and LGBTQ allies and friends and neighbors and more. I mean, our, you know, with the you know, our Jews and our Muslims communities and friends and neighbors, like we got to be there for each other. And while we are advocating for our own community, we continue to educate about us, you know, educate ourselves about our neighbors. So if you find that there are opportunities for the Asian American community, the Greater Malden community, and GMAC to be able to continue to reach across, you know, cities and communities to continue to strengthen our relationships so that we eventually uplift each other's stories and narratives and experiences and help each other build resources, please let us know, because we always love to be able to build upon strength and resources. And we want to make sure that we're always approaching from an asset base and instead of a deficit based model. So again, donations and volunteer capacity and relationship building. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you so much. It's really amazing to have that. And Chris, as you said, it's that coalition building that we really strive to do at the task force. So thank you all. Chief, I see you leaning forward. Did you want to add something? Chief? No? Okay. There you go.
I'm actually, I was having issues with my computer, so I've been using my cell phone for this. So hitting that mute button and it wouldn't go off. So no, I just think that everything I've heard here this morning is everything Malden to me. Malden being the most diverse community in the state. It doesn't happen by accident. It's for a reason. I think it's because everybody in Malden here is welcoming to everybody from every different background. When I walk down Main Street in Malden Square, I walk into stores, I'll visit 10 different countries when I walk in those stores. So that's what's amazing about Malden to me. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, it's Malden's diversity is its strength. And that's why Malden is so special.
That is true. That is true. Thank you. Thank you all. Now, moving to our second speaker, who I feel like needs no introduction because I feel like I read and see him all the time. Ken Stern, who's with us, is an award-winning author and attorney. He most recently served as the executive director of the Justice and Karen Rosenberg Foundation. Before that, he spent a quarter of a decade, 25 years, as the director of the Division on Anti-Semitism and Extremism at the American Jewish Committee. And Ken's op-eds and book reviews are literally everywhere. In the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, the Forward, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, and elsewhere. He appears frequently on the CBS Evening News, Dateline, Good Morning America, Face the Nation, the History Channel, and the list goes on and on. And he's also, and for those of us who are lawyers, this means an amazing amount, has argued cases at the United States Supreme Court, testified before Congress, as well as parliamentary committees in Canada and in the United Kingdom. He was an invited presenter at the United States Conference on Hate Crimes and served as a member of the United States delegation to the Stockholm Forum on Combating Intolerance. Ken's report on the militia movement, which was released 10 days before the Oklahoma City bombing, predicted that there would be attacks on government. And the covering memo that went with that report said that such attacks might occur on April 19th, 1995, which was the anniversary of the death of members of the Branch Davidian sect. His report was sadly called prescient, and his resulting book, A Force Upon the Plain, The American Militia Movement and the Politics of Hate, was nominated for the National Book Award. Professor Stern was the lead drafter of what serves as the working definition for anti-Semitism. He was also an integral part of the defense team in the historic London Holocaust denial case, which was David Irving versus Deborah Lipstadt. And he was also defense counsel for Dennis Banks, the co-founder of the American Indian Movement. And he chronicled that in his award-winning book, Loud Hawk, The United States versus the American Indian Movement. His latest book, The Conflict Over Conflict, much of what we're talking about at this task force, the Israel-Palestine campus debate, has been called a must-read, thoughtful and provocative, and a real gift, a rare and uncompromising testament to free expression, and importantly for this conversation, a blueprint to how to navigate the conflict over conflict happening on campus. Its first chapter is entitled Thinking About Thinking, and draws from hate studies to explain how our own thinking changes when our identity is tethered to an issue of perceived justice or injustice. So it really is my pleasure to welcome Professor Stern to join us this morning. And thank you for making time to be here with us.
Oh, thank you. It's my honor that you invited me to be with you. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing. And let me make sure you all have my email, because I'm happy to, if there's an issue that comes up a week, a month, a year from now, I'm happy to continue the conversation. So that's KSTERN at Bard, BARD.edu. In any event, I was asked to talk about the difference between hate speech and free speech. And so let me start off there. Speech is a term that I intentionally do not use and do not like, because people, when they hear that term, perceive that there's some sort of carve out in the First Amendment from about hateful speech. And there isn't. The First Amendment protects speech, including speech we don't like, and speech that may actually be very hateful. So I use the term hateful speech, and I think it's important to oppose that speech, but not to necessarily, if it's opinion, not to discipline, not to criminalize it, and so forth. And when I talk to groups, I mean, we've seen some things from the political right to try to ban certain speech, but when I talk to friends in the progressive community, I also say to them who are say, well, there's certain things that just shouldn't be said. It's hateful speech, hate speech should be outlawed. I said that at the end of the day, if you look at history, you give the government the ability to define what speech is not going to be okay. It's the speech the government doesn't like. If you look back at the times that I grew up in the 60s and early 70s, it was the civil rights movement. It was the anti-Vietnam War movement. Where there were restrictions on speech. So, this is desire for a simple thing. Let's call something hate speech and oppose it. That doesn't mean ignore it. Quite the opposite. But sometimes I think when we get into this binary of do we allow the speech or do we ask government or others to suppress it, we lose a lot of the things that we can be doing. And I'm going to mention one thing very briefly. There's a manual, it's on our website. I think we'll get a link to it, called the Community Guide for Opposing Hate. It was done by our center along with Montana Human Rights Network and the Western States Center. And there's a whole section about how to oppose hateful speech. And I'll give you one example. From when I was running that small foundation back in 2000, there was 2020, excuse me, when right after Trump was elected, there was supposed to be a march of armed white supremacists in Western Montana, where there had been threats against the Jewish community and threats against the civil rights community. Montana's an open carry state. People were allowed to come and demonstrate and have guns. So what did we do? We didn't try to shut them down because that would not have worked, but we used social media and we got people to make pledges to tie to a metric of how long this supposed march might last. So the money that would have been raised, that people pledged to, would have gone to things that these groups detested: anti-bias education, police training, security for those who were being threatened, and so forth. So they were in effect fundraising for others. Their free speech rights on their head. And we also gave the people in the community there a feeling that others around the world were doing something to have their back other than just putting a like on Facebook, right? And so it was a win for people to do something concrete. It was a win for the community there. It was a disincentive. And there are a whole bunch of other ways to approach hateful speech that don't talk about censoring. So that's, the one point I wanted to make. In terms of what's happening on campuses and what we've seen since October 7th, as was mentioned in my introduction, I wrote a book, and it was in 2020 called The Conflict Over the Conflict. So what we're seeing is not new. I was documenting the sort of the conditions that were leading each side to vilify the other on the campus and to try to suppress speech and try to curtail academic freedom. We've seen it go on steroids post October 7th, but the dynamics aren't new. And the basis of the first chapter of the book really pulls from hate studies, as was said, so that we know from brain science, we know from social psychology, we know from other fields of what happens when people get into these us versus them buckets. And it's not just about Israel and Palestine. We see it around politics, we see it around abortion, we see it around immigration, we see it around a whole set of issues where we know that when people's identity is perceived as being threatened, when there's an issue of social justice, certain things happen. People crave simplicity. They crave certainty. They are addicted to binary thinking, that everything is good or everything is bad. Symbols become very important to people, flags and ideas too. And people become allergic to the complexities of all these things. So that to me, and it happens on both sides. And if we know from studying people that are active haters and people in various different hate groups and so forth, they think this way. The world is very simple. It's very clear. The Jews are the problem. The Asians are the problem. Whatever, we're going to, it's a simple solution. That's why they vilify somebody else, dehumanize and demonize them. But I would stress that this is a human characteristic. We default to who's us and who's them. This evolutionary psychology that suggests that our brains were developed millennia ago when we didn't know if that group over the hill there was a friend or foe. And we make those quick distinctions about who's us and who's them. And there's somehow a comfort to be in one's own tribe. And that can sometimes lead to a lack of empathy and sometimes actual hatred. And the reality is that those of us who are opposing hate and do this for a living, whether we're working with an ethnic group or law enforcement or journalists or professors or whatever, we're human too. And we also try to strive to find simple solutions to complicated issues. And that's a problem because we lose about a lot of things that we should be focused on. You mentioned the definition of anti-Semitism. That's a whole other story, but basically it was put together in 2004 and 2005 when we saw, as we're seeing now, when there's shooting in the Middle East, there's an uptick in attacks on Jews, and there was a desire to get a definition that would allow data collectors, was the primary purpose, to take a temperature of anti-Semitism. And we thought that there were things related to Israel that were important. We were giving concrete examples to give the data collectors in the bunch of different European countries that we saw a correlation with the level of anti-Semitism. But if you made a parallel case and parallel definition, and we're looking at issues of racism and put in political examples, you would possibly include opposition to removal of Confederate statues, or opposition to Black Lives Matter, or opposition to affirmative action. But you wouldn't want to put into law that these are things that the state is defining as per se racist. But that's what's happening around the definitional wars, because I think IRA, what's now called IRA, is the same text as the working definition, is being seen as a symbol. We also lose a lot of how anti-Semitism functions when we think of it this way. Should we just put something on one side or another on a line of what somebody says about Jews or somebody says about Israel? Think of it this way: with the Tree of Life synagogue massacre was clearly an act of anti-Semitism. Nobody would dispute that. But if you look at the background to it, it was the drumbeat of calling people coming across the southern border invaders. And there was a meeting at that synagogue that was a pro-immigration meeting. And that was the background noise to what had happened then. A couple of months later, remember, there was the mass murder at the Walmart in El Paso, where there were Mexican Americans and Mexicans killed directly. The ideology of the two shooters was essentially identical. They just chose different targets. But when you look at one, this is anti-Semitic, one wouldn't even begin the discussion. You lose the sort of perspective that drives people into anti-Semitic thinking. Anti-Semitism at its core is conspiracy theory, that Jews conspire to harm humanity, and it gives an example of what goes wrong in the world, right? So in that context, when I talk to synagogues, I say, if you're worried about anti-Semitism, worry about the messages in society today that vilify and justify hatred of Muslims, or hatred of transgender folks, or hatred of immigrants, because you're putting those people who are getting those messages, that there's a them in our society that are a danger that we have to focus on, you're putting them on a conveyor belt to anti-Semitic thinking. Because, think back to Charlottesville, right? Jews will not replace us. Why did that come about? This was about Confederate statues. This was primarily because if you're a white supremacist and you believe that you're losing a war that you shouldn't lose, somebody has to be putting their thumb on the scale. Somebody has to be making this happen that shouldn't happen. And that's historically where Jews come in. Let me talk a little bit about the campus, because I know that's a concern. I think one of the things that's being lost at the moment is the distinction between, on one hand, bullying, harassment, intimidation, discrimination, and so forth on one side, and opinion on the others. And that's a challenge, because I think on a university, every student, regardless of whether they're in a suspect classification or not, has an expectation they're not going to be bullied and harassed and intimidated and threatened and so forth. But they are going to hear things that disturb them, including opinions that cut them to their core, and that's okay. So, what we're losing on the free speech side, just to give you one example, so all of you I know, know about or watch that December 5th disastrous hearing with the college presidents. There was first of all, there was a bait and switch that the river to the sea, which is a expression that disturbs me, but saying that was a call for genocide against Jews all the time by everybody, and that shouldn't calls for genocide be outside of the, get you in trouble in a university for saying that. Well, it's, again, people try to make things simple. Not everybody who says river to the sea means that. Hamas certainly does, but there was a poll that came out, 66% of Jewish students felt that that's what it means, eliminationist. Only 14% of Muslim students meant it that way. Then, to make it more complicated, if you look back at the 1977 platform of the Likud party, they talked about the river to the sea. So it's not that simple. But even if you take the argument that river to the sea, or even calls for genocide per se, happened and I haven't, look back at the example of David Duke. I was involved in work when David Duke was an elected representative. Those of you who may not remember, is a former Klan leader, an overt Nazi. He was an elected state representative in Louisiana. I documented in a backgrounder of his days in college at LSU in the late 60s and early 70s. He went on a radio show and said, all Black people should be sent back to Africa. He said all Jews should be exterminated. The next year, he walked around campus in a Nazi uniform, the swastika. He would have loved to have been disciplined. It would have made him a First Amendment martyr. He was vilified, correctly so, but he wasn't disciplined, and it wasn't against the LSU rules at the time. And I've seen, I care about Brandeis. My son graduated from Brandeis. I was disturbed when, just because of speech, as much as I disagree with Students for Justice in Palestine on many, many things, that just because of their speech, they were not allowed, whereas some other places talked about activity. We've seen, a rise of bullying this last year, absolutely, but we've also seen a rise of Islamophobia. And that's one of the things that troubles me, looking from a campus perspective, that one is getting more attention than the other. And I think both deserve it. I think that, the doxing trucks and other types of chilling of speech. I think the best campuses, the ones I've seen, are the ones where the faculty, despite disagreements on issues like Israel and Palestine, can model for their students how to have difficult discussions and encourage students to feel differently. I think that it's not a coincidence that the faculty who did the best at Bard after October 7th and came up with programs with students and helped cultivate an atmosphere where, okay, how do we understand this? And why is there another student that's looking at this differently? And what are these terms that people are throwing around, like weapons, genocide, ethnic cleansing, and so forth? Why don't we build a class around this, so that we can investigate what these terms mean, and why people are hearing them differently? All the people that participated, or most of them who stepped up at Bard, were ones that were involved in the Hate Studies Initiative. So that's one thing I would suggest. If you have connections to universities, I think it's not only a wise thing to do to try to get faculty and others to think about teaching, even things that we're already teaching, more directly about why we get into the us versus them buckets, how our thinking evolves in those circumstances, what it means. The more we focus on, we're actually teaching about hate, regardless of whether it's in, even art classes or the more usual suspects, social psychology and anthropology, that's a good thing. And finally, in terms of what to do about this more broadly, the last chapter of my book goes through a bunch of different ways to improve the campus climate of this. And I've talked to a lot of DEI places around the country. I think that, that's a part of it. People are doing crisis management, but the long range thing is to increase education. There are classes that are really important for developing a dynamic for having rational discussions, classes, and units on academic freedom, what that means, why the issues are divisive, and how to have a rational discussion about them. Again, why we get into these us versus them buckets. And I'll give you one concrete example of one class that I very much like. It was a class that was a simulation class. It was students had to spend about half the semester basically recreating an historic character. And this was about the guts of the conflict in Israel-Palestine from the 1880s to the late 1930s, before the establishment of the state, before the Nakba, before the 67, before October 7th, for the Holocaust. And for those of you who don't know the history, there was, when the Brits had the mandate, they sent Lord Peel to basically talk to the Jews and the Arabs and figure out what the heck do we do. And so the students spend about half the semester being in the role of one of these characters, either a Brit or a Jew or an Arab. And they were given basically roles against parts, against their background. So I first found out about this because there was the president of the J Street student organization. J Street is a Zionist pro-Israel two-state group, progressive group, was a Pakistani Muslim. And I thought that was really interesting. So I called her up. And she said, I had to be David Ben-Gurion, the founding prime minister of Israel, and be in his skin for 6 or 8 weeks. And then when I talked to her more, she said, you think that was weird? My Israeli classmate had to be the Mufti of Jerusalem. And as much of a pain in the butt that he was, the person on my side, the Ben-Gurion side, the Jabotinsky figure, who is the far right sort of father figure of Likud, was even more difficult to deal with. So, that was sort of real history by putting students in that context, as opposed to just ratifying their prejudice already, just really making them wrestle with things. And when I talked to the professor who designed the course, she said it was really funny. Students would come in and sign up for the course and say, gee, now we'll know how Israel-Palestine should have been decided. And they come out of the class saying, gee, now we know 80 some odd years after the Peel Commission why this is still a problem. And that's education. So the more that we find ways to actually engage the assets of the university on these issues, rather than just trying to, control the problem, the better off we'll be in the long run. So let me stop there.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
I mean, I like the idea that you talked about the students, how they coming together and educate. I think it's a good segue to what Chris is going to talk about, because I think when we put this all in the context of community building, how do we create those
That's right.
education? Like, how do we bring those different diverse perspectives and be able to talk about conflict civilly? And I think a lot of us, as working in our different municipalities, that has kind of been the struggle of how do we replicate that? So thank you for that suggestion.
Yeah, and let me give you one more bullet point on that. Where I start and end the book is precisely that situation. I'm on the board of an institute at Gonzaga University, and there, that's right near northern Idaho, where the Aryan nations had been. There's a whole history of white supremacist threats in that area, and for many years, the Jewish community and the peace and justice community, they were not working together, not even speaking, because the peace and justice folks had a divestment sanctions piece on Israel on their website. The Jewish community was calling them anti-Semites. And, the folks there had enough sense to say, wait a minute, we have white supremacists putting backpacks with remote control bombs on a Martin Luther King Day parade where there were children. Thank God it didn't go off. We're not going to solve Israel-Palestine. We better damn well work together for our community. And so they decided that they wanted to figure that out. And what I did with them is I said, okay, you have to make a commitment to read a certain amount of text. We have to invite certain people. We have to have an honest discussion. And we did it over a day about who Jews are, what anti-Semitism is, how to look, why we get it, some of the hate studies things, and then how to really move forward on this. And I could tell you that because I checked back in with them, even after October 7th, these folks are still working together. Their attention, sure. But that's the way, when people have a desire to say, we're not going to go down this bucket on this, but we're going to look at other things that we have to work together in the community. That's a model. And for those of you who, there's a beginning and the end of the book goes through some of those details, and I have that curriculum if somebody wants to replicate it.
Quick question as a person who is not.
I have a question also. District
I
Attorney
can't
Ryan.
see. Just one second. Is it Rebecca that, will you ask a question?
Oh,
I couldn't
Zeta.
see. Oh,
She's got to speak up so we can hear you, Zeta.
Yeah,
Zeta,
sorry.
okay.
I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me now? I think I'm at maximum. I just, as a person who is not Jewish or Muslim, I am really struggling with who's really dedicated a lot of her life to working in racial equity spaces. I am really struggling with trying to get language definitions. And it's interesting because you used one of the words that I think is, to me, sounds triggering now. It's more, it's like the term Zionist, right? Like it's starting to sound like it's more of a slur than a term that means what again, what the traditional definition is. And so what I'm trying to struggle with is, where can I find reputable resources that are not biased or leaning towards one group or another, but are just kind of reputable places where I can get a better understanding of the conflict, like you said, historically, but also socially. as you mentioned, like the term "the river to the sea," I don't know how I learned that that was, you know, kind of a problematic statement, but I've seen many progressive people using that term, and it's kind of shocking because it's a dog whistle to me. And again, I don't know where I picked up that knowledge, but like that is where I'm struggling is with this language because I mean, again, intent, whether you intend to use it as a slur or not, or something, you know, that, you know, means genocide, it doesn't change the impact that it's having on others. So I'm just curious your thoughts on that. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of these terms are getting bandied about. People don't necessarily know, you know, the meaning of it. But it's, you know, Zionism, for example, to me is just the Jewish right to self-determination in, you know, land. But the people use it in other ways too. And it's not just new. I mean, it's been used as sort of a cut and paste for Jews sometimes. And sometimes it's overt. I remember reading one of the Title VI complaint where somebody was saying, yeah, we're hunting for the name Zionist names. Well, that's not so, right? But when you're talking about Zionism as a political movement, that's something I could see why, you know, from an Arab perspective, a Palestinian perspective, what Zionism means is a tragedy for them. That's not anti-Semitism in my view. There are young Jewish folks who take from their Jewish learning an anti-Zionist position. I disagree with them, but I'm not going to call them anti-Semites. I say, wait a minute. Judaism teaches how do you treat the stranger. Judaism teaches how do you repair the world. They can't justify that with what they're seeing in Israel, and it leads them to a non-Zionist or an anti-Zionist position. So you're right. I mean, people generally use these terms as rhetorical weapons. And it's hard. So there are some, you know, if you email me, I'll send you some, you know, material. I've written one on that basically says, here's where anti-Zionism is clearly anti-Semitic. Here's where it's clearly not anti-Semitic. There's a whole bunch of things where it's unclear. It's okay. Everything doesn't have to be on one side of a line or another. And that's part of it. And the you know, again, people focus on language. I mean, we saw about the college presidents that right after Hamas did its attack, that people were demanding certain language from the college presidents. And even when people agreed with the language they were using, they were criticizing them because they weren't using the right words. This all becomes about symbols in many ways too. And that's a problem. I mean, I was distressing to hear at the beginning, people were talking so much about that language and not about, okay, what are the colleges actually going to do? What are we going to teach? How are we going to help our students? It became more of, you know, what the symbol was. And so this is a big problem, but that's not unique to this particular issue. But email me.
No, you're right. You're right. And that's the problem, right? It's about the performative
Yeah.
and not the actual actionable items.
Right. And it's the shortcuts of how I should feel about this. It's right, you know, this is awful, this is okay, and beating up the other side. And part of the problem too is since October 7th, I have a friend who looks at online things. I've seen an uptick in anti-Semitism, I've seen an uptick in Islamophobia, and his perception is not, this is A, the first time we've seen them go up in tandem, and B, most of the uptick is from each side going after the other.
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
depressing.
And I mean, I guess as a person who isn't of either group, I'm trying to really kind of sort out how I, again, lead my kind of lifestyle and show empathy and see the humanity. Thank you.
And there's some books too I can send you to that look
That'd be
at
great. Thank you. Yep. I'll email you.
Sure.
I have a
Somebody,
question,
Professor, somebody's asking if that curriculum is publicly available that you were talking
That
about.
curriculum, the one that I
Mhm.
yeah, it's not, but if you email me, I can go and fish out. There are other pieces of curriculum that are publicly available, but email me and I'll send it to you. And it would need to be updated because it was put together prior to October 7th. I mean, the other parts of the curriculum that I've done in colleges is workshops with faculty and staff about some of the academic freedom issues around this and how to think about that dynamic as a sort of a cornerstone of what you're doing. And those that I can send you to. That's not publicly available, but that's more updated.
Great. Chris, go ahead. I'm sorry. You've been waiting
Oh,
patiently.
thank you, Mary. And Dr. Stern, I've been thinking about this question for 4 days since I knew I was going to be in the same room with you. After 25 years of study, research, scholarship, all of the thought that has gone into your thinking around, the effects of bias, the effects of all of the otherness, racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia in our social construct. What are your thoughts now about this challenge of codifying or creating legislation which will follow the sort of landmark Supreme Court cases and some of the state Supreme Court cases which have tried to define the limits of free speech? Is there a way forward now? And maybe District Attorney Ryan will speak to this too, because I know she has been involved with the crafting of quote unquote hate speech legislation in Massachusetts. Is there a way forward now for legislation both at the local level and in the House and the Senate?
Yeah, my view is if you're just looking at opinion, no matter how hateful, it would be unconstitutional and unwise to have laws prescribing. That's part of the reason why I'm against the use of the definition that I was the lead drafter for, that's been used precisely for this purpose, to say you don't get funding, you don't, it has a, I'm less concerned about the individual cases and the prosecutions, more about the chilling effect. Administrators know, oh, we're going to get sued if somebody says something here that's outside the context of this. So that's a very dangerous road to go down. And I look at, I'm not a historian, but I read a lot of history, and I look at, what happened in World War I with going after people that were opposing the war. I look at what happened during the McCarthy era. I mean, there were logical reasons why people didn't like communism. When you went to having to make pledges and using law to say who could be a teacher, those things to me are problematic. And the other thing that it does is it blinds us to a lot of how hatred works. I mean, I don't know if you all read Jonathan Haidt's book a few years ago, The Righteous Mind, but he talks about moral philosophy. And what he says basically, when we get into these types of issues and look at them in totally moral terms, that morality both binds people together and blinds people to what can actually be done. And I think we're at that moment. There's a seductive pleasure that you get in trying to suppress people with whom you disagree. And for a government to have a role in that is to me is problematic and makes the fight, if I'm looking from the point of view of fighting anti-Semitism, makes it harder. It makes it harder to do that because then the issue becomes about speech, about what you're saying about Israel. And not that there can't be anti-Semitism related to things about Israel. There certainly can be. Again, the uptick in hate crimes and certain speech and so forth. But when you say, here are certain things that are going to get you in trouble just for saying, that's a problem for government, and I cannot reconcile that with the Constitution, let alone the practice that I've seen that actually can work against hate.
Thank you. Anybody else? Last questions, thoughts? Right.
We put a lot of references up to Professor Stern's work in the chat. So if you could take that there.
Professor, thank you. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
Thank you for making your work so available to us. Thank you.
Anytime. And I meant that about emailing me a year, whatever. If I'm around, I'm happy to help.
Thank you. All right. Now, a piece I learned getting ready for today, which I didn't recognize, and somebody else, everybody sees, I feel like I see Chris DeMeo everywhere, is that he is actually retired. I didn't actually know that because I see you doing so many things. So Chris is retired after 3 decades of working in community organizing, social justice advocacy, and electoral politics, including 3 presidential campaigns. And he served in a wide variety of roles: marketing, media communication, messaging strategy, field operation, community outreach. And with all of that experience, particularly around events planning and management, he has produced a number of community multicultural performance and visual arts events locally here throughout New England and in New York City. His advocacy has focused on racial justice, immigrant and refugee advocacy, criminal justice reform. Those two are part of why I see Chris so often. Disability and LGBTQ plus rights. He's a board member of the Youth Advocacy Foundation, their EdLaw project, a founding member of the Massachusetts Criminal Justice Reform Coalition, and an active member of Woburn Welcomes, as well as Mystic Valley NAACP. He served on Woburn's Juneteenth Committee and is the Ward 7 chair of the Woburn Democratic City Committee. And with a graduate certificate in diversity, equity, and inclusion from Suffolk, Chris really strives to be a culture change agent, and he has certainly done that in many ways. He's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the amazing things that they've been doing in Woburn on these issues. So welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Marion. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to Antonia for this this lovely privilege and this lovely honor. I would preface and sort of offer as an overture that I'm coming, from a place of privilege. I'm coming from a place of extraordinary opportunity. And it's important for me to always frame these conversations and the presentations that I might be invited to give by suggesting that nobody is an expert in this space. We are all learning, we are all growing. And I hope to dedicate myself to teachability in every step of the way, particularly in the community building work that we've been doing. I'm thrilled that we have a few of our Woburn friends and neighbors in the room today. It's wonderful. I will just perhaps give you a brief overview of how we have shaped and created and sort of tried to create message here for the community building that could be as broad, as multicultural, as diverse, as inclusive as possible, in a context, like the city of Woburn, which is not unlike any other community in Middlesex County, or the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for that matter, where there are natural obstacles, there are natural divisions, there are barriers that need to be dismantled, there are systems, structures, and institutions that have been socialized in whiteness now for, over 200 years. And so we have tried to create a message and a mission that approaches the idea of growing multicultural, diverse, and inclusive community at the neighborhood level. So we're not educators, we're not diplomats, we're not academics, but we're trying to come from a place of what we call beloved community. And if I share my screen briefly, I can maybe introduce you all a little bit to what we look like. Are you all seeing my screen?
Not yet. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there it is. There it is. And so our messaging really is this journey and this initiative to build beloved multicultural community. Antonia had invited me to join all of you today to talk about a recent community conversation and panel that we convened and that we hosted at the Woburn Public Library, which follows very nicely Dr. Stern's presentation and his work, in which we were able to gather leaders, thought leaders, social justice activists from the Jewish, Muslim, and Christian community to create and convene a panel discussion and a community conversation really centered on peace. Again, we tried to detach from the controversial sort of driving forces of what we think is creating an uptick in hostility, an uptick in, hate incidents, to use that term lightly, harassment, intimidation in the community. And we tried to center and focus on a conversation about peace. We tried to frame it as a collaborative conversation. And I was delighted that I was able to leverage the partnerships that we have developed with the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, as well as the Islamic Council of New England and the Boston Workers Circle for Social Justice and Culture. This is a Jewish cultural organization based in Brookline. I will not lie to you all. I will tell you at the outset that it was difficult to find folks in both the Jewish and Muslim community who felt comfortable and who were, committed to and willing, to enter this conversation. And I'm delighted to tell you that the numbers are growing. This is the second event of its kind, bringing together folks in the Jewish, Muslim, and Christian community. The first one, we had over 500 attendees in a Zoom online event. This event, which we hosted last month in Woburn at the Woburn Public Library, we had 75 live in attendance and approximately 200 joining online. So it's very evident to us that there is a lot of yearning and a lot of desire in the community to create these safe spaces for constructive and productive conversations around peace and justice. And I am hoping, and I'm sure all of you in this room hope, that we can continue to shepherd this movement forward and continue to create these safe spaces and these constructive opportunities for thought leaders and people who care deeply about this issue to come together to try to find common humanity, common ground, and to have difficult conversations. And by the way, this was a very difficult conversation. I'm going to put this link in the chat room later if you all want to watch the panel. The panel conversation that took place on June 20th is available online. We've put it up on YouTube. I'll put this link into the chat room. I hope you'll all take some time to watch it because it's a good example of how a very difficult conversation, in fact, a conversation that often can be trauma-inducing, a conversation that can be so uncomfortable for folks, as Dr. Stern's work demonstrates, for so many of us that have identity and so much of our psyches connected to a conflict in a different part of the world, a conversation that can really, really create, deep, deep-rooted discomfort is not only possible, but it was a rather joyful experience, I think, for most people. We did have, you will probably predict and probably understand that we did have some pushback after the event, but it was minimal, it was marginal. And the response that we have received, both emails and telephone calls, both to the folks at the library as well as to Know Your Neighbor Woburn, because we were the primary sponsor, have been positive, wonderful, wonderful, from the Jewish community, from the Muslim community. And sort of the resounding result has been, when are we going to do this again? We are delighted to tell you a little bit about us, and this might be a good time to pause. We are just a group of social justice and racial justice activists. Some of us are members of Woburn Welcomes. Some of us are active in the Mystic Valley NAACP. We were brought together 2 years ago as part of the organizing team for the Juneteenth Woburn celebration. And we thought, gee, we wonder if we could create an initiative in Woburn that would seek to build community around the intersection of identity and culture. In other words, could we bring people together for multicultural celebration, for opportunities to share cultural performances? Could we host speaking programs? We've done programs that have focused on poetry and storytelling, all to highlight and elevate underrepresented communities and underrepresented cultures in Woburn. And the response is good. I have only a 2-year baseline to share with you all, but to date, over 2,000 people have attended our events at various locations throughout Woburn and the surrounding community. We're happy to tell you that the key to this has been outreach, outreach, outreach. Right, Antonia? Partnerships, 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 partnerships. It's getting to a point where I think people see me coming and they go, oh, here he comes. Here comes the Know Your Neighbor guy. And we've built a marvelous coalition, a marvelous a foundation of partnerships in as many parts of sort of the social construct of Woburn as possible. Woburn Welcomes is quite active. SCI, which is another extraordinary organization that's based regionally here in Woburn, has been supportive. We have developed relationships now with Woburn United Methodist Church, the Lutheran Church of the Redeemer, the First Baptist Church, the Winchester Unitarian Society. We are making progress with new relationships with Mass Peace Action, and on and on and on it goes. I also want to tell you that part of this formula has been very effective, and I think most folks in this room understand the importance of young voices and activating youth leadership. Every one of our events has had participation from our multicultural groups. Sometimes they're called affinity groups. At Woburn High School, we have the Woburn Memorial High School Embrace Club, which is a multicultural social justice alliance. We have a new Black Student Union that was just formed this past fall, which is thriving. You'll all be happy to know over 100 students signed up for the new Black Student Union at Woburn High School, as well as the high school STEP team. So we have included and welcomed student reflections, speeches, cultural performances, as well as our Boys and Girls Club student groups, our teen groups that actually organized and ran our last big event in March. I literally turned it over to them. I said, okay, you guys want to be the organizers? Fine. Use me as a resource. We have the funding. We'll fund the event. And it was completely run by students with over 300 people in attendance. It was just amazing. So we seem to be developing a formula that's been effective, and we're hoping that we can continue to, build the partnerships, continue to draw people into what we really feel is more an initiative than an organization, and continue to reach more and more people. Like Malden, Woburn is growing. Woburn's demographics have been shifting dramatically in the past several years. We are now approximately 35% non-white Eurocentric. Woburn is becoming one of the most multicultural communities behind Malden and some other communities in the Commonwealth. And we're seeing, as that occurs, we are seeing the natural process of communities becoming isolated, underrepresented, and certainly not feeling a sense of belonging in the cultural life of the city. So we're hoping that this is helping to fill the gap, and this will help to create the kind of multicultural community building that we believe naturally, it naturally neutralizes what happens when you don't build multicultural community. In other words, instead of reacting to all of the sort of the social ills of harassment, intimidation, hate crimes, the long list of what's caused by otherness, our response is to build beloved community. Our response is to create opportunities for people to get to know each other in safe, constructive environments, for people to discover each other's cultures, each other's religion, and to experience the magic of what happens when people find that we all have more in common than what separates us. And so I'm happy to take some questions. I don't want to go too long because this, we do have some time limits here. I'm also happy to share with anyone more detail about our approach and our method and sort of our organizing strategy. I'm going to put this link right now into the chat. If folks want to spend some time to watch this panel.
Next, Chris, we uploaded it also in the chat.
Oh, good.
I have just one quick question.
Yes, Donna.
Oh, sorry, Mary. Dr. Stern was just talking about, even I think our last meeting, Ted had spoken about incorporating local college campuses in college students.
Yep.
Has your group thought about that, or
Well, when we study, I would answer quickly. When we study And by the way, I'm not nearly as academically accomplished as our esteemed Dr. Sturm. However, I've done a lot of study of the brain science and the neuroscience behind bias. And we know that young people, just because of brain development, have far less biases than old people like me. So we try to involve as many young people in every stage of our planning, in our messaging, in our cultural content creation, because they just get it better than we do. And we try to listen to them. And frankly, I've learned more from young people about, these successful formulas for building diverse, inclusive communities than I've learned in any college campus or any academic program. They just get it. They really get it.
And Chris, can you
Other-
put your email in the chat
ahead.
just so people can get in contact with you?
So I mean,
I can't
as I
see
say, Marion, I'm happy to respond to questions. I didn't want my presentation to be too long because, we all have other things to do today, right?
Right. I just can't see everyone, so if people have questions, just feel free to speak up.
Chris, if you can stop sharing your screen if you're done, I
Oh,
think.
does that help? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, that's okay.
I'll also put our website. There are links from our website to other events. We have done 2 events now, and we're going to do 2 more in the fall that we call simply Sharing Our Stories. And we reach out and we invite members from our immigrant and refugee community to join us in a coffee shop setting at the Studio Cafe, a very informal, relaxed, and safe coffee shop setting for sharing stories. And they have been just wonderful. There are links from our website to those events as well.
And Chris, if people, I hope you would be willing, I know we've got lots of communities on here. If people want to run similar kinds of things, can they pick your brain a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, yeah, I'm available. I'm available with no billing, no fee structure, nothing. If you want me to help you organize, there's a formula that's effective. And we're happy to support organizations. We don't have enough funding yet to fund you, but someday I would like to get to a place where groups would come to us with an idea and they give me a 1-page proposal and we could even fund it, But right now we're willing to help you as much as we can. We have built a pretty good organization of organizers and volunteers. And I am a big proponent of, collaborating and working horizontally. We all have to get out of our vertical stovepipes and we need to share information, but more importantly, share about, what's effective? How do we work effectively? Particularly, how do we grow partnerships? How do we collaborate? How do we cross the lines which have created all of the social otherness that we're trying to break through, right? So we're happy to help.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything else? Well, this has been a great collection of speakers. I'm grateful to everybody today. Just some really interesting things that are affecting all of us every day. And I know as we move towards August and people come back to our campuses will become even more of an issue. So, excuse me. Please feel free to be in touch, share the resources. That is I think the greatest value of this task force is the connections we forge here. And again, I'm grateful to all of our speakers. I will see everybody next month. Stay cool. Enjoy these summer weeks. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.